This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hindus in Focus podcast. I'm Zubeda Hamid, your host for today. The connection between the gut and the brain has for long been established, but recent research is increasingly finding that problems in the gut are linked to problems in the brain. A paper published by researchers from Harvard Medical School, along with others, for instance, has found that the risk of developing Parkinson's disease was 76% higher among those with damage to the lining of their upper gastrointestinal tract than among those without such damage. In fact, the researchers found that symptoms in the gut could begin years or even decades before symptoms of Parkinson's set in. Research has also indicated links between gut health and other neurological conditions, and even between the gut and your mental health. So, how does the gut brain connection work? What does a healthy gut microbiome look like, and how is this linked with the overall health of your body? What is the role your diet plays in this, and how important is it? Are you essentially what you eat? We discuss these questions and more with Dr. Ennapadam S. Krishnamurthy, neuropsychiatrist and founder of Buddhi Clinic in Chennai. Hello and welcome to the Hindus in Focus podcast, Dr. ESK.
Hi, very nice to be here.
Doctor, let's start with a little bit of background. Could you give us a little background about the gut brain connection? Do these two parts of the body communicate and how?
Well, the oldest part of the human brain is the limbic system. And this consists of the hippocampus, which is the center of memory, the amygdala, which is the center of emotion, and a number of limbic structures. And this part of the brain is what we share with the humble rat. So the primary mammal has the same part of the brain. Now, very interestingly, the connections to the rest of our body, all our internal organs, emerge from this part of the brain. They emerge from the limbic system, they go through the brainstem, and then they accompany the spinal cord to innervate all our internal organs. And the gut, obviously, is a very big part of this. That the brain is therefore connected directly with the gut, and there are both afferent, which means connections coming in, and efferent connections going out. And this is what leads us, for example, to understand that we are hungry, to understand that we are satiated, to understand that smell, for example, is a very important part of appetite and eating. And smell memory is something that, again, we share with the humble rat, and it is because the olfactory, your smelling cells, are directly connected to this part of the brain, your memory center and your emotional center. So there's this very intricate network that connects your emotional brain, your hypothalamus, your brainstem, with your gut, apart from all your other internal organs. And there's a whole set of activities that are going on 24/7, for which we neither are in control nor are we truly responsible. And that's what makes this whole area so interesting.
Tell us a little bit about the recent research that has linked Parkinson's disease with problems in the gut. That indicates also that gut symptoms can begin decades before, even before the symptoms of Parkinson's set in. How does this work?
Absolutely. It's a wonderful paper in JAMA. And what it is looked at is a very large cohort of people who are part of the Framingham cohort, who had endoscopy and biopsy years ago. And they have been followed up after decades to see who developed Parkinson's disease. And we are talking about a cohort of almost 10,000 people who had gastric endoscopy and biopsy. And uh, they sort of talked about mucosal damage, and they defined it as having gastric erosions, esophagitis, ulcers, or peptic injury, which was observed on upper endoscopy or in pathology reports. And they compared it with people who came negative for mucosal damage. And what they found was that having gut mucosal damage hugely increased the risk of developing Parkinson's disease in later life. And so when they looked at these people and they compared those who had mucosal damage with those who did not have mucosal damage, the ones who had mucosal damage were far more likely to develop Parkinson's disease than the ones who did not. Other interesting associations were the identification of Helicobacter pylori, which we do know is a very important part of gut health, and very important part of gastroesophageal reflux disease. But the identification of Helicobacter pylori seemed to directly link itself to the development of Parkinson's disease in later life. And they also looked at some other interesting associations. For example, they looked at smoking, and they could not establish a correlation between smoking and Parkinson's disease, but that's another very interesting story which we can talk about. They also looked at the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, and again they did not find the same association between the use of those and the development of Parkinson's disease. So this is a very interesting and an important study because the value of a cohort where you follow a group of people for years and years and years is humongous. And what they did was they identified such a cohort, they went back and looked at all the results, so it is retrospective in that way. But they also carried out what were called nested case control studies, where they compared the two groups, the ones with mucosal damage and the ones without, and so on, to be able to identify these very specific risk factors. So I think the conclusion from this study that gut mucosal damage in early life does seem to lead to Parkinson's disease or increase the risk of your developing Parkinson's disease is quite a robust finding and a robust conclusion.
But why, doctor? What is the connection between what goes on in your gut to Parkinson's disease?
So the gut microbiome has been a huge area of study now for years and years and years. And one thing that we must understand is that our gut microbiome is to a large extent inherited. So there is a huge genetic aspect to the gut microbiome that we are born with. These millions of bacteria, generally good bacteria that exist in our gut and which are organized in a certain way. Now, what we also don't seem to really understand is if, or rather, we've started to understand now, is that if you alter your diet, for example, you switch to a high protein, fully meat diet for even as short a period as 1 or 2 weeks, it has a huge impact on this gut microbiome. So it is your intestinal flora and fauna, as it were, are quite influenced and susceptible to what happens to you and what you do. We also have understood that a process of dysbiosis, where there is damage to the gut microbiome or malformation of the gut microbiome, is often associated with a number of disorders. And one of the links to this is inflammation. So, in a sense, this is a very complex relationship of existing, bacteria, good bacteria that live within you, how they get altered by what you do, or what you are exposed to, and what impact that has on your health in general. And it's a very, very long term, complex, and interesting relationship. Now, what has happened over time is that we have understood that this has a role to play, especially in the development of a range of neurological and mental health conditions, and especially so neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. But gut brain health is today, there is a focus in autism, for example, there's a huge focus on gut brain health nexus and how that may be impacting in the development of features of autism in young people. The same has been described with epilepsy, with multiple sclerosis, with anxiety, with depression, with bipolar disorder, with schizophrenia, with other forms of dementia other than Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, of course. And so a range of conditions seem to be today implicated by alterations to the gut microbiome. And it seems as if working on this and modifying it has a role to play, both in helping people get better, but even more importantly, in prevention. And I think that is the knowledge that is increasing as we go along.
You mentioned stress and depression and anxiety, doctor. So, does that mean that these minor mental health issues are also linked with your gut microbiome, not just neurodegenerative disorders?
Oh, yes. I think if you think about it, follow people with neuropsychiatric disorders as we do, um, uh, the role of stress, I think, has been hugely underestimated. If you take, for example, today our understanding of Alzheimer's disease and what causes Alzheimer's disease, health and lifestyle has a huge role to play. The lack of sleep, for example, has a huge role to play. Your variations in appetite, for example, or variations in your diet and what you eat have a huge role to play. Universally, for neurodegenerative disorders, for example, we understand today that the Mediterranean diet is protective. It's something that is, there's quite a bit of research to show us that the Mediterranean diet, just the way it is, rich in fruits and vegetables and legumes, and also including fish and other healthy aspects, has a huge role to play in protection. So, and there's another side to this which is often spoken about, for example, in Alzheimer's conferences, that it's not just the Mediterranean diet, there is a Mediterranean lifestyle that goes with it. So, meals are eaten slowly in the company of people sitting under the sun. For a longer period of time, people often have a siesta after a meal, and of course, as you can imagine, all that is very stress protective. So, in a world where we are all the time in a hurry, hurry, worry, and curry are definitely the risk factors for, not just gut health, but also for stress. And I think that these links are becoming more and more apparent as we study these neurodegenerative disorders today. Not just degenerative disorders, but other conditions that affect brain and mind as well.
So, essentially, you are what you eat and also how you eat.
To a large extent, what you eat and how you eat is going to determine your overall health, including your neurological and mental health. And if I can flip it around, if you think about what causes you irritable bowels, for example, or nausea before an exam, for example, it is very often intense stress, isn't it? So, in a sense, therefore, the autonomic response to stress that we have is what has a huge impact on how our gut is behaving on a day-to-day basis. And many studies show that having irritable bowels or having constipation or having significant collection of material in your cecum, for example, or delayed gastric emptying, for example, all these are associated with neurological and mental health conditions.
So, how does treatment work, doctor? Has medicine kept pace with what the research is doing? Do we now treat mental health or neurological conditions by involving the gut?
So I think the kind of understandings that have become very widespread, for example, is the damaging effect of antibiotics and long term or chronic antibiotic use. I think this is something that everyone understands today. So that's widespread knowledge. The use of probiotics in a number of situations is something else which is also becoming widespread knowledge. There are two sides to this. The one very important side to this understanding, evolving and wider recognition among the medical community, is to do with prevention. So, the more we understand about this, the more we understand. For example, we had this very interesting webinar with an American professor who studies gut and Alzheimer's disease. And towards the end of the webinar, he put up this bottle of, some brand of Indian Chawanprash. And he said, the reason I'm putting this up is because, when I travel through India, I pick this up. And this has got 90 plus ingredients. Whereas if I look at my average diet, which as a Westerner I eat, it only has about 10 ingredients. So he said that, the diversity of ingredients in your diet is a huge protective factor for conditions like Alzheimer's disease and dementias. So that was the point that he was making. So in a sense, we are becoming more aware of the diversity of diet, about preventing inflammation, about maintaining good health, about looking after our microbiome as a preventive factor. We're becoming aware. When it comes to treatment itself, for example, obviously, there are no simple dramatic solutions, but we are, for example, becoming more and more aware of the role of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve, as you know, is the longest nerve to leave the brain and supply all your internal organs, including your gut. And it has a huge role to play in what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. And what we do know in the last 20 years is that when we modulate the vagus nerve using vagus nerve stimulation as a technique, we are able to influence gut health. In fact, we are able to influence a lot of autonomic symptoms. We are able to treat epilepsy. We are able to treat depression. So, a number of conditions seem to respond to vagus nerve stimulation. We're able to treat migraine, for example. So, in a sense, it's a very good example of how new technologies and are leveraging on this understanding. And of course, this becoming widespread, the knowledge becoming widespread, the treatments becoming available in a more widespread way, and of course greater evidence for the benefit of all these treatments is what we need in order for a lot of this to mainstream itself. But I would think that, just like the paper we are discussing and the whole subject, I think this whole area is a very big watch this space place for all of us who are interested in mental health or interested in neurological disease, and who are also interested in the holistic approach. And something else that I'd like to add here is, if you go back and ask yourself, in which systems of medicine was a lot of attention paid to the gut? Very interestingly, ancient systems of medicine, including systems like Ayurveda, they pay a lot of attention to gut health. They pay a lot of attention to what you eat and how you eat it. And so the ancients seem to know, something through, obviously through careful observation, about how to positively influence gut health and how gut health can negatively impact on you, through the development of other conditions and diseases.
Doctor, talk to us a little bit about what you mentioned earlier, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. You said just now that we know that antimicrobial resistance is a growing threat and a huge public health emergency. But did the study find the role of NSAIDs in gut health at all?
So, very interestingly, for years, NSAID, there have been studies that have shown NSAIDs protect you from neurodegeneration. For example, they seem to protect you from dementia. Various studies have shown that in the past. And in fact, there's been interest in looking at NSAIDs as a possible treatment or as a possible prevention for dementia. So there's been that kind of research, and of course, other studies have not necessarily agreed with that finding. So that's been a little bit of watch this space. Now, what this particular study did was it also looked at the role of NSAIDs and whether NSAIDs were similarly implicated, like mucosal damage, like Helicobacter pylori, were NSAIDs a risk factor in the development of Parkinson's disease? And it did not really find that. It failed to show an association between the use of NSAIDs and the development of Parkinson's disease. Which so it leverages us back to the older information that we've had, which is that in some way NSAIDs may actually be protective. Now, there's another thing that one needs to factor in, which is not always thought about. The one other finding from this study was smoking and its relationship to Parkinson's disease. Now, very interestingly, we have for years thought of smoking as being something that protected people from Parkinson's disease, and there have been several theories as to why that happens. Uh, we do know that smoking is not good for your gut health. We know this very, very well, especially for gastroesophageal reflux disease, which is a risk factor as per the study. So we know that smoking is not good for your health, gut health. But we, in this study again, they failed to find an association between smoking and the development of Parkinson's disease. But there's been research for years that tells us that smoking may actually prevent you from having Parkinson's disease. Now, one very interesting one very interesting observation that has also been thrown into the mix by an international epidemiologist is that people who smoke are risk takers more often than not. And more often than not, they are what we call type A personalities. The people who develop Parkinson's disease are more nervous, worrying type of people, and they are what we classify as type B personalities. I'm using the classifications as they emerge from the Framingham study. So there is this, the reason that people with Parkinson's disease are not smokers, is because of their temperament rather than smoking protecting you from Parkinson's disease has been one aspect that has been thought about. But this whole thing, smoking, the use of NSAIDs, and the development of Parkinson's disease and our failure to find an association in the study. One other factor that could play a role in all this is your propensity for stress and your ability to follow a rhythmic lifestyle, which has a huge impact to play on your gut microbiome, as we know. And we do know that people who are risk takers, who are impulsive, who are smokers, are far less likely to have a rhythmic lifestyle. So I think there are many elements to this mix that we don't entirely understand. And I think these relationships will be quite complex relationships. The other complex relationship we perhaps don't understand well enough, although we are alerted to it, is the role of inflammation in all this. We know inflammation is important, but we don't know enough about it.
So is it bidirectional, doctor? So if I'm feeling stressed, my gut microbiome does not respond very well, or is it because what I ate affected my gut microbiome and therefore I am stressed?
I think it is definitely a bidirectional relationship that your gut health has an impact on your emotional well-being and your neurological well-being, and vice versa. When your emotional well-being and neurological well-being are affected, that has an impact on your gut. So I think it definitely is a bidirectional relationship that we are talking about.
In this age of massive amounts of processed and ultra processed food, where our diets are becoming less diverse, what would you advocate to keep the gut microbiome healthy? Because you said one portion of it was genetic, but another portion is something we can control.
Yes, I mean, I think quite honestly, what generations of your ancestors have done has definitely set a basic template or parameter for you in terms of your gut microbiome. I think this is something that you need to understand. All of us need to get this right. Now, the other thing, of course, therefore, is that changing that in a dramatic way, which people often do in the pursuit of health, uh, may not always be helpful. It can always also be damaging and can have long-term consequences. So I think it's extremely important, therefore, to think about what's the diet you had as a child, what's the diet that your family has followed for generations, and not be too far away from that. I think that's probably something that's important. The third thing, of course, I think is that diversity is important. So, in fact, one very interesting perspective that people today bring to the table is to talk about how many colors are there on your table. in terms of fruits, vegetables, and other things that you're bringing into your diet. There's a sort of a thumb rule is a multicolored diet is a very diverse diet. Obviously, not multicolored because of a range of unhealthy substances, but multicolored due to the inclusion of a range of healthy things like fruits, vegetables, and legumes. So I think that that is something to also think about as a thumb rule. And I think that's why I go back to this scholarly friend of mine who put up this Chyawanprash. And what he was trying to say is, spoonful of this gives you 90 plus ingredients. Why would you not have it a couple of times a day? Now, I'm not advocating Chyawanprash, but I think it's a very interesting point that there are ways to bring in diversity into your diet, which are probably more feasible for many people in modern life. Then of course, the right thing, of course, is to eat farm to table. The right thing, of course, is to go organic. The right thing, of course, is to blend a diverse range of items into what you're cooking. But then, of course, modern lives don't always allow all that, and therefore there may be practical, simple ways of making sure that you actually have a diverse diet. But I think the point is that diverse diets probably are very protective.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Doctor.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.